corporate world reminds me of high school in the 80s. You guys remember this movie? Marketing is full of the popular kids. Sales are the jocks. Engineering are the geeks. And UX, well, you remember, right? We over-index in artists and writers and band kids and theater kids and goths and gamers. But we do okay. And we also have our fair share of skaters and hippies and rockers and rebels. In a nutshell, we're the freaks. And I say that with mad respect. Sometimes it feels like the only thing all these corporate departments have in common is that we're smarter than the guy in charge. However, I do believe there's a particular kindred spirit between the freaks and the geeks, because we have a lot in common. The first thing you notice is that we both really look different. And we have the capacity to empathize deeply. We value truth, and I think Bill's talk was testament to that. There were marketers out there like, oh my God, he just said we're in trouble, and search for meaning. And we share a healthy dose of angst, which drives us to make things and challenge the status quo. So when innovation centers, creative agencies, and R&D labs beckon, it's no wonder we go jump at the chance to work together to make amazing things. Away from the office parks, no cubes, no fluorescent lights, no policy memos for us. We're free to let our freak geek flags fly. And we're valued, and they pay us for it. At least that's how I felt when I went to the Creation Center, which was T-Mobile's Innovation Center in downtown Seattle, apart from the corporate office park. The year was 2008. But I'm going to start the story a little bit earlier. After embracing my own freak identity in high school, I worked for a series of creative agencies and companies. Started in gaming and worked for a lot of kids' entertainment properties. And the thing about all these types of companies is that they just have creativity inherently at the core of the values. It's in the culture. So I never really thought about it. It was just valued, and that's what we did. And then I got a surprising offer. T-Mobile was trying to figure out how to be more innovative. There were executives running around talking about operating in zero gravity. And they needed people like me to come in to help them with the zero G. So, the first thing I did there made a lot of sense for me. I managed the teen-focused sidekick business, which was a natural fit. And basically, I had to take the lagging danger platform and distract from that and find a benefit, find a need that I could address. So we created this amazing personalization ecosystem where you could design your own handset. So it impacted the hardware. But then there were accessories, there was retail display, and there was a web experience as well where you could actually upload your own photo and print it on these shells and have it in your house within a week. And then there was a community on the website where you could post your design and vote on them and comment. And so it was pretty cool. It was pretty exciting. It was a true multi-channel experience, big deal. And the thing that was really amazing about it is when I pulled this off and got it shipped within 9 months, people were astounded. They couldn't believe I had done it. And that was sort of an eye-opener for me that this was so hard to do. And I was exhausted. It was a process where at every stage, there was just an amazing set of barriers, and much harder than any place else I'd ever tried to get something to market in. So I was, when I did that and I was getting awards, I had the chance to go down to the Creation Center, and I hightailed it down, right? Because I got to be back with my freaks and geeks. It was this beautiful LEED-filled innovation center, or LEED-certified, light-filled innovation center. And when I first arrived, I was sort of like mesmerized by the ethos, like the sticky notes and the eam chairs and the prototypes. And I was also euphoric with just the level of smarts and creativity of the people around me. And it was really noticeable that everyone was spending their time doing as opposed to talking about doing. And like for the first time, I didn't have to spend hours a day managing Outlook, right? Managing that this is a little different than email, but it was managing that sort of Tetris game we play with our calendars. And I had time to think, and what I was good at was valued. And the work was exciting. We focused on new businesses for T-Mobile. Lots of things I can't show up here, but family communication hubs and kids products and photo sharing, and then like next-gen solutions for our core businesses. So, voice over IP and concept phone designs and experimental UIs and some Carom retail experiences as well. But it wasn't all rainbows and unicorns. There were some people who were frustrated, a lot of ambitious young people who weren't getting anything to market. It would sort of end in vaporware. Or this guy here, he was an experienced industrial design manager from Nike, and we had a lot of really world-class talent. And he said to me one day that he felt like he was making props for a stage show, and he was. So I focused on trying to fix things. I built bridges and spent a lot of time at headquarters and looked for sponsors and paths to market and did everything I could do to empower my team to succeed. I also had to kind of teach folks about the business reality because they weren't really connected to it. And we made some progress, but it wasn't enough. We couldn't get the business to really broadly embrace our work. So as I look back now, in hindsight, and I actually did a lot of interviews and prep for this just to kind of get out the insights, people who went through the whole experience, like Val that or experts in the field. I think it comes down to a few things that we could have done better. One is alignment on our charter and our goal. Basically, we thought we were trying to create disruptive innovation that was 3 to 5 years out. And if you talk to the C-level folks, they were frustrated that we had only gotten one product to market in the first year. So there's a kind of an inherent contradiction there. Culturally, I think there were also some challenges because, we really sort of plopped down this R&D center away from the business, and we didn't change any of our business culture or practice or structure or expectations, right? So, if you don't make room for it in the process, then you've got people like me trying to find your way in, but it's pretty tough. It's kind of I think something like that has to come from the top down, which leads me to executive support. If I could go back and do it again now, I would be having steercos regularly, using a lot of their time to go over our pipeline and priorities and KPIs and things like that, and really talk in their terms about our business successes. And the last is we spent a lot of time on product, which that's been a theme today too, right? A lot of us came from product backgrounds, and that's how we knew kind of the behavior of iterative thinking and everything we've been talking about. But the problem is the world was changing around us in the carrier landscape. The iPhone changed the game, as did iTunes and Google Play. And we needed to be thinking about that. We really should have been spending more of our time on experience design, service experience design. So what happened next is not a pretty story. In 2010, T-Mobile was feeling the effects of the recession and decided that we were over-investing in UX and innovation. So they started by pulling a few people like me out that had ambidextrous skill sets, put us in the business, as product managers. And then they started the layoffs in waves. Some of this happened while I was out on maternity leave. And they eventually shuttered the Creation Center, which was sad. They moved the remaining team into the marketing organization where they sort of huddled as refugees because people didn't really understand or value what they were doing. And they were trying to get them to work in terms of KPIs, which we were having a conversation about that earlier, and nobody knew what KPIs to assign their work. So at this point, I came in and took over the team. And we had a small UX team at this point, visual designers, interaction designers, researchers, and we were focused on mostly inline design, but I wasn't going to give up on the strategic component, the strategic innovation component, because otherwise we're sort of relegated to what we were talking about before, right? The hitting it with a pretty stick at the end of the process, which nobody really wants to do that. So, it was an uphill climb, and we were also, of course, if you guys were following, we were being acquired by AT&T, and then we weren't, and we were in limbo, and then there were more reorgs, and there was no investment. So we were kind of hanging out. I was trying to hold on to the team that I had, developed a mission, developed a strategy, started to do some of those things I talked about that we needed to do at the Creation Center as well, really create transparency and visibility to leadership. And it was an uphill climb, but it was, I would say we have had some real successes. In terms of people, we had some people actually come back, which was exciting. The stuff that we've been working on has made it to market and has made a business difference, which is exciting. And then we've also started to work on some innovation projects in earnest with support from leadership. And that part, once we got the UX stuff stabilized and we got the inline work stabilized, then it was time to really start to bring the practice of design thinking to this group of people who, for the most part, were more inline focused, usability engineers and folks who were kind of happy to do that kind of work, and that's why they were still here. But the work we were doing didn't make a lot of sense because a lot of the things we were fixing were just like inherently broken and needed to be rethought, not just sort of prettied up. So I started to train my team on design thinking techniques and getting some partners in that could help us with that, training kind of like, revamping my own skills. And what I'm noticing is that it's working. I'm noticing designers iterating more quickly at a lower fidelity, which is not easy for designers, and pitching less and listening more. I've seen researchers stepping into experience design and storytelling in a way. I'm not seeing the same kinds of reports with just scads and scads of data and information about everything we learned in the study. I'm more seeing a visual story being told that people can kind of walk away from and know what the big takeaways are. And we've actually had some changes happen with some of the products that we're working on because of that. So the other thing I see is that our cross-functional business partners are more deeply ingrained in our process, and that's really important because they're becoming our champions as well. So it's hard to dedicate time and energy to this work when inline pressures were breathing down our necks. I think everybody feels this. When we try to be ambidextrous like that, we feel the tensions. The first tension that really comes up, I think, is consumer needs versus business needs, right? You needed to go ahead and do the email that didn't make sense because there was a business need around that. I think we all deal with that all the time. The second tension we deal with is messiness versus polished. And what I mean by that is, when you start to bring the design thinking process into an organization, it's messy, right? And it's like, T-Mobile is a very buttoned up place where people are well coiffed and they all look good. And I was in the marketing group, so it's marketing, right? You say the right things, you're always confident about what you assert, and you don't always the human needs might sound a little whiny and unprofessional, but it's our job to represent that. This is the big one, I think, is risk-taking versus responsible. So people have been talking about business owners earlier in the conversation today who can't take a risk, especially managers in the middle. And that's because they're trying to be responsible, right? And they want to do something that they know is going to succeed and that they can measure. And you inherently can't measure something that hasn't been done before. So it sets up a real tension for us. And then you've got sort of a culture designed around validation and research that's about validating things. But what you really need to make change is the kind of work that brings you inspiration, the generative research. And then this is a big one, right? This is, I think, why it felt so free to be in the Creation Center in the first place. Time to think versus endless meetings. So, this is my team today. You can see there's a couple of Eames chairs that have made it over, but we are in the Cube farm still. We're still doing primarily inline work, and that's a really good thing. Because when someone comes to you with an inline problem, one, if you work with them on it, you gain trust and you strengthen that relationship. But two, you have the option, you have the possibility of reframing that problem and making it more meaningful. And we do that all the time, right? I know you want help with this, but I think the bigger issue is this. And it's hard to do that when you're separated. It's much easier to do that when you're in line and you're ingrained and you're, cubes over from the other people. At CES this year, T-Mobile announced that we're going to approach the wireless industry differently. We've basically said that the way that wireless carriers do business with their customers is insane, right? And we're going to put the customer's needs at the center. That's a pretty big statement, and it's exciting. I mean, that's our cue, right? This could be the dawn of the new age of UX at T-Mobile. But, I mean, it's definitely a turnaround situation, so it's not like we're going to have tons of investment with which to do that. So I've had to do a lot of thinking about how are we going to do that effectively? How are we going to, create this kind of spark when I'm facing the tensions that we just went over? So I think the very most important thing is reducing cognitive overload, right? We have to do less. We have to focus. They'll probably cut some more of my resources. So that means that I have to be really just diligent and confident about saying, all right, well then we're gonna cut these things. We're not gonna do them. Those are gonna fall away. And we're gonna focus on the things that are strategically most important, which I think the biggest is I keep saying that wrong, service experience design, right? That multi-channel service experience design for a place like T-Mobile that has care, that has retail, and that doesn't really control the product. Stop monkeying around with the product. Stop focusing on it so much. Second thing, we've got to prioritize generative thinking. And this is hard when you don't have that many resources. For those of you that do research in the room, I think it's hard to clear the time to do this. It's also hard to clear the time to do the synthesis and all the stuff we know we should be doing that seems like it's easier to get from an out-of-house agency than to do ourselves inside because you're always dealing with so many fire drills. But it's crucial, and so we have to prioritize it. Keep leadership engaged, right? I talked earlier about the need for steer codes and transparency and visibility, and I think this comes down to this thing that wasn't really natural for me as a designer and a creative type to manage my business in the way they expect everybody else to manage the business. And the whole idea of steer codes just sounded awful to me, right? Like, God, nobody's gonna come, and it's gonna be a ton of work, but it's really necessary. I had to adapt how I was doing it, but we're getting it right, and it's helping us get the right kind of traction. And you have to diffuse fear of failure, right? And this is a hard one. So what I'm doing about this right now is really trying to bake this in to the conversations I have with everybody who's at the leadership level is, okay, let's talk about success metrics, let's talk about KPIs, but let's also talk about hit rate. Let's also talk about the percentage of failures I'm allowed to have, right? Because if you're gonna measure me, then I want that in there and I want room to fail. And then the last, I think most important thing is you've got to empower cross-functional teams. Because when you bring together sales and marketing and engineering and research and design, you see issues from all perspectives. When you turn that empathy that you use for the consumer on your business partners, you understand their issues in a different way and you can deliver for them differently. When you really listen, you can build on each other's ideas, which makes them better and helps you transform the businesses, the strategies, the designs, and make them more meaningful, more impactful. Also, your path to market is built in, right? It's not like you're fighting to make sure this thing actually hits the market. The inline team is gonna make that happen. And when you run into obstacles, you've got a diverse set of skills that can help you through them, which gets you to better results faster so that you can win for you, for the customer, for the business. So it's a natural tendency to want to kind of hang with your peeps, right? Staying connected with all of your business partners is essential for meaningful product innovation, for meaningful service innovation. So my partners happen to be in the Cube Farm, and that's where you're going to find me and my team for the foreseeable future, spreading the gospel of user-centered design. Thank you.